Yo guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another video. I know it's been a while since I've last uploaded to my channel, but I'm actually here today to talk about 5 unique tips in FL Studio that I honestly think are very useful to be familiar with in your own workflow and beat making. Before we get into this information, I want to give a quick shout out to Unison Audio for sponsoring this video. We'll get into that a little bit later, but let's go ahead and dive right into this project. So like I said, we're going to be talking about 5 useful tips to use while working in FL Studio. To demonstrate a few of these tips, I'm going to be using a beat that I had made not too long ago that I think is it's a cool beat, and it uses a few of these different techniques. Let's go and dive into the first technique here, which is the flam tool. Now, the flam tool is something that I use a lot on my drums and percussion, but a flam is basically the term that refers to 2 instances of a snare hitting at once, one hit just occurring slightly before the next and slightly lower in volume. It's kind of hard to put into words, but I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate it right here on the piano roll. If we take a listen to this beat here. So as you can see, we got a pretty bouncy beat going on. All the drum sounds are from my personal drum kit, which you can find on paulkits.com. But the thing that I want to focus on is going to be the snare and the hi-hats. So if you look closely at my piano roll, you'll see that where my snare is hitting, I have a second snare hitting just slightly before it at a lower velocity. And I didn't pencil this in manually. This is something that you do with the flam tool, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate. What you're going to want to do is hit Control A to select all the notes, and then Alt F. As you can see, it pulls up the flammer, which has a time knob and a velocity knob, 2 buttons that say absolute and before. But basically what's going on here is the time knob is going to adjust where that second note is placed in reference to the notes that you have highlighted. So as you can see, if I move the time knob back, then the flam note goes behind the main snare. So when I'm flamming notes, I like to put it just slightly behind. You don't want this to be an extremely noticeable thing. It's supposed to be very discreet, very subtle. That's a technique that's used in actual, live drumming. Now, I also use this technique on hi-hats. So that's what the hi-hat sound before the flam. And then once again, hit Alt A to select all the notes, and then Alt F. It just produces a nice sound effect. All right, so the next tip that I want to talk about is something that I kind of refer to in my own head as 808 ghost notes. So we're going to look at my 808 piano roll, which is right here. And, we have an interesting beat going on because, as you can see, some of our 808 notes are a lower velocity than others, right? If you put a second 808 down somewhere like here, and you bring the velocity all the way down to 0, the note is still there. It's still cutting off that first 808, but we brought the velocity down so you're not hearing it. And that's a great way to add rhythm and cuts and stops within your drums and your 808 patterns. Let me play this section without this 808 note. So that would just be like your standard 808 pattern, but with these ghost 808 notes. Definitely has a more pioneered sound, if you will. Alright guys, so moving on to tip number 3. This is going to go back to the sponsor of this video, which is Unison Audio. For this tip, I'm going to be featuring their free mini MIDI pack, which is basically the light version of their main MIDI chord pack. Basically what it is a free pack of a ton of different major and minor chords, as well as major and minor chord progressions. I just want to show you guys the way that I use them in my own workflow. I'm just going to open up a blank pattern here, and then I have Serum loaded up with a preset that I made to kind of demonstrate what we're going to do here. But if we go into the piano roll and go into our Unison free chord pack, which by the way, you can download this from the link in the description of this video. It actually includes a few chord progressions. I personally look for minor chords, minor chord progressions. We're gonna go into, for example, C minor, and then instead of going into the individual chords and just grabbing, you know, one chord at a time, I like going into the chord progressions here. We can drop this into the piano roll here, and it's gonna pull up a full-on progression, right? So if we play it, I'll play the pattern, and then using my mouse, I'll skip around to the different start points of the chords just by clicking on like the 2, the 3, and the 4. I'll kind of try to audition in my head which variations of this progression sound good, right? So if we play it here, it's kind of the same thing as chopping up a sample. You're just chopping the MIDI chords and trying to figure out a new progression from the one that you're starting with. And once again, thank you to Unison Audio for sponsoring this video. All right, so moving on to tip number 4, and we're gonna be working with the envelope feature of the sampler. So when you open up a sound in the sampler, it usually looks something like this. And if you click this knob, you have a whole section titled envelope. And I know when I first, started making beats, this is something that I didn't really pay attention to. In fact, it's actually kind of hidden, I feel like, in the sampler. Let's say if we were to open this hi-hat and not even use the envelope, right? It would just sound like a typical open hi-hat. And if we play the beat here, in fact, I'll even solo the drums. And you can see with these notes here, even despite how short they are in the piano roll, the open hi-hat is still playing out for the full length. It just sounds pretty standard. If we turn the envelope on here, we're setting the path of the volume to follow the shape of this envelope. If you're a more experienced or intermediate producer, then you're more than likely super familiar with envelopes. Again, this is just one of many techniques to add rhythm and bounce to your beats without a whole lot of effort. Now moving on to the last and final tip of this video. This is not really going to involve so much the production side of FL Studio or beat making, but more so the file organization and workflow type of deal. So I'm sure we all know that in the browser of FL Studio, you can add different folder paths, file paths, so that you can access things like your Unison MIDI chord pack or your splice folder straight from FL Studio without going into your PC browser, right? And the way you do that is by going into options, file settings, and then adding your different destinations. You can add a Google Drive folder to your browser as a browser destination, right? The way that I use it personally is if I'm making a beat on my computer and I want to hop in the car and listen to the beat, the quickest way for me to do that is by having Google Drive as a browser destination and just simply exporting the beat straight into my Google Drive, and then going into my car, opening my phone, and then streaming the beat straight through Google Drive. Especially on a PC while using an iPhone, the process of getting, my beats or whatever straight to my phone quickly has always been a headache. There's so many different ways that you can apply this organization tip, but I definitely feel like a lot of my fellow producers can benefit from doing something like this. Anyways, guys, those are my 5 essential tips for beat making in FL Studio. Once again, I want to give a shout out to Unison Audio for sponsoring this video. Definitely check out the free MIDI chord pack. That's going to be it for me today. So if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and a comment letting me know what you thought. If you need any of these drum sounds, you can find them in my personal drum kit at paulkits.com. It'll be linked in the description as well. But other than that, guys, it's pretty much going to be it for me today. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.